right. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Thanks for joining in. In this stream, I think it's very fairly simple as titled on the tin. We're going to look at the prevailing wisdom about if you're starting your first hex map, how you should configure it. And then through going through that, hopefully we'll come up with maybe some ideas on stuff that they missed or where we might want to fill in. The question comes up, people will often ask me when they ask me anything at all, kind of where should I start with my hex map? And my general guidance is, hey, pick something that you feel comfortable dealing with. Well, if you're just starting off, I think in particular when you're just starting off, that may not be super helpful. I'm trying to take into account all kinds of things. Some folks who just love to just dive into world building, those that don't, and I think, hey, you got to kind of find your lane. But I think people desire often a more prescriptive answer. And some of these things we're going to look at today try to give us some of those answers. I have not read through these things before. I've just kind of muddled out on my own. So I'm going to be interested to see what we're going to see. And then we'll riff on that. I have the links right now. It's in the forums. I have a forum topic for this video, for the stream, and I'll list it there. I'll also add stuff into the show notes as we go along. I don't think I have anything else to say, so let's go for it. Hey, Anam, thanks for hanging out there. Mr. Flip, welcome. Ian Wise, howdy, and Krister, hello. So the first one up we will go is maybe the one I've seen referenced the most in terms of your starter hex map advice, and that is from Chicago Is from way back in 2017, the just 3 hexes. So like I said, I haven't read it. So it is new to me. I've just heard it mentioned by name a lot. So I know that people use it. And I think I did just kind of breeze through this just to kind of get a sense of how long it is. And it seems like he goes into a fair amount of detail on the kind of stuff that they recommend. So let's get on there. Brian Smith says, oh, hey, the 3 hex thing. Exactly. The 3 hex thing. So from November 28, 2017, but obviously evergreen in nature. Just 3 hexes, campaign starters. Quote, it takes just 3 hexes to start a campaign, end quote. And I think someone has quoted that to me in the stream before. Krister says they've heard a lot about this, and they're also a subscriber to the Chicago Wiz podcast. All right. Yeah, I know we follow each other on Twitter, but I didn't realize he had a podcast. So cool. I'll have to check it out. The idea of that you don't have to start big to run a campaign has been something that I've been saying since the late aughts when I was blogging fast and furiously. It's also something that David Bowman, I miss you, Dave, and I felt strongly about when we concocted the one-page dungeon template that grew into a life of its own, almost 9 years ago. Of that writing, it's even longer ago now. Anyway, the idea that prep and content don't have to be ginormous is something that I've preached since day one. I mean, I didn't do so much to really start with my ongoing 9-year AD&D campaign. I had a little story I'd written and a concept of what I wanted the world to be, say, 3 sentences, something like this. My world is a post-apocalypse world where civilization is retreating from the forces of chaos. Magic is hated, there's only one official religion, and the rulers are afraid of the future. There is much out there to be recovered if someone is brave enough. Then, in the style of West March's campaign, I created a home base. Let's call that Hex 0. A town is easy to create and almost a given for starting, which is why I don't include it in the 3 hexes. Anyway, let's call that town Enonia. What's a good story for Enonia? No more than 3 sentences. This is what I came up with. Enonia is a town on its last legs, on the edge of retreating civilization. It used to be a crossroads type of town on the road to the great lost city of Eresia to the east. The unsure marshal lives in the keep close to town. And then here we have an image of the hexes so far with just blank except for the 1 hex that has our village in it. That's some good flavoring to me. That's some good flavoring to set me off on figuring out what is going on within the town and around town. So now I need destinations for the players to do things. This is where I looked around at what I might have, either as existing dungeons or things I've created or something that appeals to me. At the time I started my Etenera, formerly Dark Ages campaign, the magazine Fight On #1 had just started publishing in spring 2008 and is a great resource. Within issue #1 I found a small adventure called The Ruined Monastery by James Malazewski. It's a great start for a little introductory adventure, so I put it to the right of Enonia. And I apologize for butchering that name, assuming that I did. And I assume that I did. Brian Smith didn't know there was a podcast either. Yep, check it out. I'm sure it's linked here somewhere on the blog. And if Brian Smith, if you go to the forums, there's a link to this page, and I will add this after the fact to the show notes as well. The links to these articles that we cover. In 3 sentences to set the mood of this hex. The dark woods are where the goblins and spiders live. Between Enonia and the woods lies a ruined monastery, abandoned before the doom. It is whispered that chaos might have found a home here. So now we see these updated, the blank hex map. First he added the village. Now they've added a mixed forest hex, and then in between the two, he's added a monastery. Now we're cooking. So let's put something to the south of that hex. I wanted to make my own dungeon at this point, so I noodled around with some ideas and also came up with the idea that dwarves were missing and had abandoned something here. Cough, stolen from Elder Scrolls, cough. The Dale Woods are home to the crafty kobolds. Brave hunters who dare enter the woods have found entrances to what seems to be a cave system, but none dare go within. Between the Dale Woods and Dark Woods lies the abandoned road to Irisea, with a bridge that crosses over a stream. So we see they filled in another woodlands hex. So this one not a mixed woods, conifers and was it deciduous, but just a deciduous forest. So you're just regular kind of temperate forest. And we got symbology for the cave entrance here. Notice that I suppose he's going to go into it. He has not yet put in the road, if he intends to. Now, this hex actually contains 2 features, the abandoned mines and an innocent bridge. You see, I always liked the concept of having a foe that the players had to grow to defeat. So I put a troll under this bridge. Well, not exactly a troll. In a metal/whiskey/cigar infused haze, I came up with a cross between a troll and an ogre mage, a troll mage. And thus, within my campaign, a legend was born. Since I had this idea of a lost city to the east, I also wanted to give the players some reason to go out that way. And they came up with an idea of a ruined inn at the edge of the woods, before the grasslands. So here was my third hex. At the ends of the woods lies the remains of a wayfarer's inn lies. I think that's a typo. Beyond the inn is the road to the grasslands surrounding the lost city of Irisea. Nobody have been to either the ruins of the inn or to Irisea in 2 generations. Rumors abound to what may lie forgotten. So we can see here that we have the original hex of the village now, which does not count against our 3 hexes. And now he has put out 3 hexes next to each other. So we have the 2 woods hexes on the other side, a grasses hex, and then I don't really do this myself, but I appreciate it, using that border area to denote things that are sort of on those border areas. So whatever, say, the farmland and basically farmland, grazing, essentially settled, cultivated lands around the village. There's I forget what exactly is there, the monastery or the sort of holy compound that's ruined between there and the woods. The cave is in the wooded area, and then on the edge of the grasslands and the woods is that ruined inn. Oh, I can happily move my text. There you go, Krister. Wasn't really paying attention to that. There it is. That's it. That's all I needed to start my campaign rolled off. A town/home base and 3 hexes. From this little map, I ended up constructing this, but that took time. Still, with a landmass the size of Russia, it's cool to know that the players have only explored a teeny bit of this world. So much left to discover. This is the first cut at a map from about 2010. So, if I were to put this all together, this is what I do as a starting campaign with just 3 hexes. Campaign. This is a post-apocalyptic world where civilization is retreating from the forces of chaos. Magic is hated. There's only one official religion, and the rulers are afraid of the future. There's much out there to be recovered if someone is brave enough. Home base. Now notice he's updated the map, so now we have some numeric labels. Home base is 0101. Enonia is a town on its last legs on the edge of a retreating civilization. It used to be a crossroads type of town on the road to the great lost city of Irisea to the east. The unsure marshal lives in the keep coast close to town. And now we have the official 3 hexes, which are 0201, 0202, and 0301. 0201, the dark woods are where the goblins and spiders live. Between Enonia and the woods lies a ruined monastery abandoned before the doom. It is whispered that chaos might have found a home here. 0202 is the Dale Woods that are home to crafty kobolds. Brave hunters who dare enter the woods have found entrances to what seems to be a cave system, but none dare go within. Between the Dale Woods and Dark Woods lies the abandoned road to Irisea with a bridge that crosses over a stream. And then finally, 0301, at the end of the woods, lies the remains of a wayfarer's inn lies. I think he just copied his typo around. Okay. Beyond the inn is the road to the grasslands surrounding the lost city of Irisea. Nobody has been to either the ruins of the inn or to Irisea in 2 generations. Rumors abound to what may lie forgotten. That's it. That's all I needed to get things started. Grab a map or two for the monastery, the Dwarven Mines, and the abandoned inn, and away we go. I think one thing that's interesting, and we often talk about the rules of 3 in all kinds of different ways, and I kind of like the concept of just using 3 sentences to describe these different locations. We don't have to get into a lot of details yet. We just got 3, and we basically have pretty much 1 point of interest per. I mean, you could talk about this. There's maybe, we'll see, there's kind of 1 here. There's, it's basically 1 if we attach this to this hex, and this is this hex, and this is this hex, even though they're kind of the crossroads. We essentially have 4 hexes total, and we have 4 points of interest. So that also is very manageable. Notice that in the, and I'm not sure if this is intentional or not, but he doesn't actually even name, even though the at least the inspiration or from the idea for the cave system in the Dale Woods it hasn't actually mentioned that it's a Dwarven Mines or anything. Just calls it a cave system. Maybe it's open-ended and that they'll change later, and then he'll have a better idea. It'll be something else. But he hasn't even at this point hasn't even locked himself into what kind of cave system that is. So we have another example here. Let's try another. This will be something that I have not thought about or played within my campaigns. A fresh start from scratch. So he's got another example, and I'll just go through and read this one also. The campaign, all lies frozen under snow and ice, as the land heals from its wounds from the great wizard wars. The once proud civilized races struggle for survival against the snow, the ice, the wind, and the arcane storms that howl outside. The gods cry out for those brave or foolish enough to dare start the healing. We can see that it's pre-filled in the 3 hexes. Notice that the 3 hexes they've filled in, is it in the same spot? It's actually in a different spot than the other ones, right? So he just has kind of this general template, and you could set those up wherever you want. I'm not sure if there's a particular reason why this many hexes is in his template, or just that's just what he's got, but he's positioned them in a different spot now. So home base, which is at 0101 again, or maybe that's what it has in common. Like there was the other home base at 0101. Yeah, okay. So I don't know if that's intentional, but both home bases are in that 0101, and then positioning the 3 hexes around in some configuration. The configuration of the 3 hexes is also different. Before we had 2 hexes, and then the third hex was between, or you had to pass through the other 2 hexes to get to the third one. And in this case, we basically have a semicircle. The hexes form a semicircle around the home base. So the home base, 0101, for many generations, humans and dwarves have lived in the ice and snows of Elketra. They survive in a constantly changing landscape with their igloos and tents. The great wandering caravans of mammoths make their way here twice a year, bearing goods, news, and visitors to this place. So that's the home base. 001 looks like it has either a polar bear symbol, or I don't know if that's sure if that's supposed to be the body of a polar bear or a polar bear walking around. But let's just see what the description is. Legend says that the great white bear lives in the cold sands to the northwest. It is a trial of adulthood for both men and women to journey to seek the bear, for it can foretell one's future of glory or misery. There are many horrible creatures and dangers in the journey that few make. The bear is not even just a polar bear, but it clearly has some kind of supernatural element, because I'm presuming the bear doesn't try to eat them, and they don't kill the bear, but they actually go to talk to the bear. Then we have 0100. Great silent menhirs surround the barrows and tomb tunnels of old, dug within the glacier that spills into the sea. Treasures beyond imagination are said to lie within, as well as a great artifact lost by the Uro wizard Mekelteth, who fell in the wars. The angry spirits that roam the ice fields do not tolerate intruders into their domain. And then finally, 0201. Legend says that one of the great bergs that float on the seas is the castle of the last wizard assassin. Her remains are whispered to lie within the castle, guarded by sea monsters, terrible wolves, and spirits of those she killed. She was the last to hold the great Staff of Law, an artifact which could bring life back if wielded by one with a true heart. And you see this is an ocean hex, and there's the castle inside it. Purely off the cuff, made only by imagination, some use of various things I've seen in my own readings, gaming, and culture. Time it took to write all that, 30 minutes. Yet, I have at least 3 different places for players to go, plus some interesting tidbits of other things that I could use if I were to run this as a campaign. You can do this too. 3 hexes is not that hard to come up with, and you've given your players a limited set of choices to start, as versus some huge world where choice paralysis might set in. And that is the end. A little dungeon in each hex, Brian Smith says. Like it. Yeah, I mean, so we got 2. So definitely in this one, I don't know if the bear one is a dungeon, but certainly we've got different elements we could think about. We do in this one have at least 2 dungeons, which is one being the tomb of that last of the wizard assassins, the other one being the menhirs, and then we have the interesting polar bear or great bear, I should say, adventure, which could be just getting there, speaking to the bear. It'd be interesting to see if I threw this in front of some players, where would they gravitate towards? Would they gravitate towards the bear? Would they want to know that? Or would that be something that would be more, once they've gotten a couple levels and got a taste that they want to know about their ultimate glory, would going to see the barrows and tomb tunnels be something more of their interest? Or maybe they would be super into getting to that the floating castle. But of course, the floating castle has a barrier, which is that ocean, or that whatever that water is around here. Presumably, I guess we're on sort of glacial or ice flows, maybe. So even a little bit, maybe coincidentally, there might even be a little bit of a progression here with having to solve or do something with the first 2 hexes to kind of get to the 3rd hex. Because you might say, well, getting to the 3rd hexes might require resources. You might want to get hirelings, or you might want to need rafts, canoes, whatever it is to get out there. So you say, well, we're broke. We don't have that stuff yet. Well, or maybe there's even other things besides. Oh, there's all those barriers. How can we get through it? Well, if I want answers to that kind of question, maybe I need to go talk to someone that might have spiritual, supernatural information. Oh, go see the polar bear, the great bear. Maybe the great bear requires something from this, some kind of thing that they say, hey, okay, well, if I want to give you this, or you want this information, I need something from the tombs. Or the bear's like, well, you're going to need this thing to get across, and it's in the tombs. Or you don't need any of that stuff, but you need money to pay for it, so you need to go to the tombs to do it. So you can kind of see how there's you could see a little circle forming up. In the same way, in the first example, that was a little bit different, is you have to if you're interested in that lost city, you have to at least travel through these other 2 hexes first. You might then stumble upon, you might not even be trying to get to the caves, but there's the stream, and there's the bridge here, and there's the troll mage, and that troll mage makes it really difficult, which means you go, you know what, we want to get to that lost city. We can't pay that toll or whatever that troll mage is demanding of us, and we can't kill it. We got to go, either got to go around it to the north or around it to the south. And then doing those things might run you into the monastery, run you into the caves and the kobolds and whatever the other stuff is, which could be adventures as you're dealing with that. And then maybe you want to end up getting to the inn. And then by the time you've done those things and gotten to the inn, you've had a chance as a GM to flesh out more of this stuff as you need. Krister says, given that there are so many ready-made dungeon maps online for free, you can get started pretty quickly. Yes, and I will do one of the in the other classes, in the dungeon crawling classes. I definitely will get into leveraging the. I did mention in the stream yesterday, but we'll go in more detail. Just leveraging the crazy amount of online resources there have if you don't have the intention, will, or time to create your own. Brian Smith says, I would think you would want these to have some connection to the characters, right? Or they'll be like, well, these 3 options have nothing to do with anything my character is questing after. I think there's definitely, so to answer your question, Brian Smith, I think it's definitely come at it from kind of the OSR bent, which for me tends to be that, hey, your characters are interested in doing the adventurely things. As it said in this little campaign note here, there's much to be recovered if someone's brave enough. And who are you? You are someone who is brave enough. I think if you're playing a game in which your characters are setting a lot of goals up front and it's very character oriented, then yes, you may need or want to tie them in with their characters somehow. I mean, that has its own dangers, right? Because if you have 4 or 5 characters who each have their own goals, you can every once in a while tie them together and say, oh, look, you all happen to be going to the same place. Your brother was last seen heading to the inn. Oh, you thought this thing was at the inn, and you thought this thing was at the inn, or maybe some of them are at the city, the lost city. And so everything kind of converges on, great, we need to go do that. But the danger of that can be that you can splinter once people start to get their own stuff, or one person's little story ends that they just pack up and leave. Well, I'm finished, which can be good or bad, depending. If they're okay with dropping off that character and creating somebody new, then maybe that's just their character's little story and you're done. Or it can mean that you're splintering all over the place. I tend to try to start the characters off, or the players off really, with this concept of, which I think he does well in this little campaign recap, is kind of, here's what the game's about. The game is about you guys getting power and authority and, money. So when you think about your goals, what are the things that you need those things to do? What is your end goal? I need to attain enough power to resurrect my dead father. Great. Well, that's going to take you a long time. Well, how am I going to gain power and all this stuff? Well, you're going to need money. You're going to have adventure. Boom. Player number 2. Why do you need power, wealth, and all that stuff? Okay, I've always wanted to found my own kingdom. I want to be, I want to be like Conan and wear my crown on a troubled brow. Great. You need to do the same things, just for different reasons. And then somebody else might say, I want to understand the mysteries of the universe. And you know what you're going to need for that? You're going to need same thing. You're going to need power. You're going to need money. You're going to need resources. So those are your ultimate goals, but they all feed back into the same things that you're doing in the world, which is going out to adventure. Brian Smith says, guess the starting HQ could be their tie-in. Yeah, I think I always like to ask the group, why are you together? And certainly if you're starting out with a new campaign and something like this, you're asking, hey, why are you guys all in Annonia? Are you from Annonia? Did you end up in Annonia because you had nowhere else to go? Did you end up in Annonia with dreams of doing something? Like, why? And of course, the related question of what makes you stick together. In old school games, generally, my experience was you stuck together in some sense because it's the game and you're playing a group of adventurers. So you stick together even if you don't have written on your character sheet, I would die for the character next to me, and the character, those things that you do in Fate and these other things, which those tools that I like, I appreciate. How are you connected around the table kind of thing? Oh, I'm connected to you because we're cousins. And oh, I'm connected to you because you saved my life. And you make all these connections, which is why you stick together. They'll often, back in the day, and you played in the group because you were playing in the group. It seems like with the now that we emphasize a lot of, well, what are your character reasons for sticking around? And if that's something that you need to handle with your players, then you need to kind of use the tools that are out there to come up with, why are you guys all here in the town? How are you all connected to each other? What keeps you glued together, and do that sort of thing. But that's kind of outside, right? Sort of the Hexmap question. So I guess, what do we think about these 3 hexes though? I mean, it's actually 3 hexes plus a town hex. There's a couple things. This may be kind of a you. I probably wouldn't just have these as just blank. I would probably want to fill these in somehow, just because I think that the players just might ask, even if their all intentions are, we're going to go find these caves out here in the woods. You're leaving town. I want to kind of give some, I want to be able to have them be able to survey the landscape, and there's just nothing here. So I'd want to put something there. I think, I don't know, hills, more forest. I don't know, maybe not more forest, because these forests are kind of special, so they're individual. So maybe there's hills there, or there's a bigger river there, something around at least this part around the town, so that if they say, hey, you know what, I just want to look, you know what, we're gonna go east. There's no question we're gonna go east, but I just want to look west. I just want to know what's west. I want to be able to answer that kind of question. And if it gets stuck in the moment, I might fumble around with it in the moment. So I would probably just fill those in for myself. Krister says, I guess this is also a bit of a sandbox versus story-based campaign thing. Going back to Brian's question, yeah, there's your approach when you're using this in your game is going to differ whether you're playing in a sandbox style campaign, and that's been discussed and agreed upon by everybody, or you're playing any more character driven narrative style campaign where people are expected to be following grand or maybe not so grand character goals. Mr. Hobbs says, such a Debbie Downer. And then Brian Smith says, yeah, there's less implicit camaraderie. I think the players don't always bring that to a campaign, which is a bummer. I think the one thing, Brian Smith, is this stuff can develop through the game. I always think that, or I always hope that you don't have to start the game with a lot of the things. You don't have to start the game like this whole thing, right? We don't have to start the game with a whole world full of hexes. We can just start with 4. We don't have to start the game with everybody acting like they're the A team. The first part of the campaign can be them becoming the A team, them developing those relationships and those specialties and all that kind of stuff. And then the second part of the game is when they get to fully revel in these things that they've built up. I don't think we have to have it all from jump. And in fact, as a player, I don't often like to come up with that stuff at jump. I mean, I can do it. Oh, how are you related to this guy? Oh, that's good, right? Or how do you do with this one? Or what's your backstory? I usually come up with these fairly, I would say, kind of cruddy backstories of, I think in that Swords and Wizardry game, or maybe it was Labyrinth Lord, I don't remember. My thief was just somebody on a walking tour who just got stuck and ended up needing money. I think ran out of money or something. So they were looking for odd jobs to do, which then put them in contact with the employer that ended up putting the party together. That was it. And I had no other kind of great things. And I tried to let the events of the game kind of shape this character. Went from sort of very naive to being kind of a jaded, veteran, having had several close swipes with death, that kind of thing. Brian Smith says they agrees that the characters will develop, but they like when the players themselves understand they are ultimately a team working with each other. I mean, I hope they do, but you can't mandate that stuff, Brian Smith. Either they're going to do it. I mean, you can talk about it, but you can bring them to the water, but you can't force them to drink. But I tend to think most folks do. So in terms of the advice here, we're already halfway through, so I'll have to jump over to Welsh Piper. One of the things that, and this is probably the reason why I gravitate towards doing some kind of top-down elements in my hexcrawl, is there's some things I kind of just like to know. Like, I like to know where my coastline is. I like to know where my mountains are. I kind of like to know, okay, where are my rivers flowing? Are they flowing north to south here? Are they flowing across here? I like to know kind of that grade of elevation. I kind of like to know things like, what is this little area? How does it, just maybe one level up? So if this is a locality, right, Enonia, I kind of like to know that one layer up of, is it part of a duchy, a kingdom, a barony, some kind of loose affiliation of villages? Is it really just totally isolated out there? I sort of like to know that stuff. But I think the key thing here is build that stuff up. So for me, I say this is the stuff that I like to have. So I can do that. If you don't need that stuff, you don't. You don't need to do that. But having a system like this where you go, okay, here are things that immediately give your players multiple things that they can do so they have choice. Like you said, it's not overwhelming choice. It's not any compass point under the sun. It's, here are the things. You're in Enonia. Here's what Enonia is about. Irisea, which seems like probably is set up as kind of your maybe not long-term goal, but maybe your least extended goal. Ooh, we got to get to the lost city of Irisea to check it out. To get there, we have to deal with these other things. And the monastery might provide a way of getting, at least getting equipped. The troll mage is a good kind of barrier in a sense that forces us to go into those other places, but also is a little bit like, okay, if this troll is just what's stopping people here, there's probably a lot worse down the road. So we got to kind of get to that level of being able to deal with that troll mage, and then we'll feel more comfortable going east. So it's almost a barometer a little bit of, hey, you don't have to. It's not like a hard level skill gate, level gate, whatever they call it, I think, where it's like, hey, you got to be level 4 to ride this ride, because you can just go around it. We're hexcrawling, right? We don't need to take that road. But at the same time, it's a little bit of a, if this thing is here, there's probably harder stuff behind it. So let's kind of gear up. And then the second one takes a little bit, which I appreciate, took a little bit of a different approach. So here we have three different sort of objectives. They're kind of scattered around. Me myself, I would probably fill in at least 002, 0102, and 0202. Even if I didn't put stuff in it, for me, I just want to know kind of what the terrain is. Does this sea opening or whatever, the edge of this ice flow, is this the edge? Is this more ocean, or is this all ocean? Does the ice flow continue? I just kind of want to know some of that stuff. Even if it's just putting the terrain down, just like they're leaving the village and they look. Where is that? Are they at the kind of the sort of edge of the ice flow? Does the ice flow continue? Does it give them some different ways of approach? Whatever. I just would kind of know that stuff. But we talked about it before. You get a nice selection of things. We can, I don't know if this is intended or not, but we could see where you can kind of create some relationships between these things. So we could say maybe there's some relation between this castle tomb of the wizard assassin and the ancient tombs over here, and then maybe there's some connection with the great bear, and so we can see how that then becomes some nice interlocked adventures with potentially different factions and different interests and different things that will cause the players to move around these different points just within 3 hexes and your town. Brian Smith says, at least the terrain type of those past your immediate area make total sense. Yes. Right. We haven't gotten to the goofy stuff yet. I mean, I don't think these are, because we're the advantage of doing your thing like this is, unlike doing something like Worldographer, you don't have to clean up a bunch of goofy random placements because you're placing things thoughtfully. The flip side is you have to have those thoughts. If you're starting your hex map, your campaign, and you're like, I want to do this, and you have no idea where to put anything, then having something like Worldographer, they can just fill in and you can just zoom around and pick a spot might be helpful to you. Or you have to kind of come up with something. You gotta come up with that campaign kind of elevator pitch summary, and then that will help. That will basically give you essentially your starting location and the kind of environment. But if you don't have that, then yeah, you might need something else. All right, so that was the wisdom from Chicago Wiz. I think it's good. Like I said, I would probably do things maybe a little bit differently, but I think it's in terms of giving you a good starting point that you can flesh out. I like the idea of limiting yourself. Hey, don't go into paragraphs and paragraphs of backstory. 3 sentences about your campaign, 3 sentences about each location, 3 hexes. There's a discipline there, and keep discipline. And if you find that you've got all kinds of extra energy, you can't hold yourself to that. Maybe you could start to do more, but get those done and really lock those in a way that, whether he meant to or not, gives not only choices to your players, but kind of ways that you can see their interrelationships, so that it gives you angles to move from one thing to the other. What does the monastery and that inn have in common? Or the monastery and the caves, or the caves and the troll? And we could think about, or the kobolds and the troll. Kobolds and the dwarves, or are there any dwarves left? Did they beat the dwarves? Where did the dwarves go? Did the dwarves move on? Did the dwarves move somewhere else? Did the dwarves have something to do with that city? You can see how you can just start churning around all this stuff just from those few hexes. Brian Smith says, is this effectively a point crawl on a hex map, if that even makes sense? Well, you have your points of interest, and eventually I think you can. I always thought that eventually, if your player becomes your player, if your party becomes extremely well traveled, then the elements of your hexes that they have mastered essentially become a point crawl. And here, let me explain what I mean using this one. So you're starting off in this village here. They decide to go find the bear. The bear might never become a point crawl, because the bear might never stay in one place. It's moving around. There's evil spirits. There's winds. There's whatever. The terrain is such that it's not leaving tracks. You're going to have to find that bear each and every time you go in there. It's going to be somewhere else. That's probably even part of the mystique of the bear. Maybe you have to go to different parts and summon the bear, whatever, right? This bear is not sitting in the same place. You have to go find it. So that will probably always be a hex crawl or a sub hex crawl. You're going to come in here and you're not interested in moving on. You're interested in finding the bear. So we would zoom into a sub hex level and start monkeying around. That's what that would be. Going to these ruins, or going to these, what do they call that? The Great Silent Men. Here's the barrows and tomb tunnels. First time they go through, that's a hex crawl. You got to find it. There might be, who knows, depending on the backstory, maybe this is one of those things like when Antarctica was not in the ice, right? This was built. So there's no roads, there's no nothing. You have perma ice and snow that just covers everything up except for like the tippy tops and maybe whatever. Maybe this was on a great kind of mound or mountain. That's the only reason, or hill. That's the only reason why it's not all covered up in snow, but you can't get there. So you're going to have to find it. But then you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Some number of times you can decide at some point you're going to know the way there. You're just going to know. In the same way that you live somewhere and you could find your way to some spot in the woods, even if you haven't marked everything down, you just kind of know. And at that point, you could pretty much consider this that there's kind of a trail, even if it's a memory trail, muscle memory trail that leads you back and forth. And then that becomes a point crawl. You don't need to worry about the stuff in the scroll because you know how to get there. You've been there a bunch of times. You just know. Now, maybe some circumstance changes everything up and then you got to find it again. Fine. But from that point, that becomes a point crawl. The floating castle, it's floating. It's on a little ice. Is it on a float? Is it on a like a little iceberg or is it on like a solid island? What does it say? It's on a it's on a giant iceberg. So this one's floating around. So that's probably a sub hex crawl every time you go in there because it's not staying in one place. And especially if these gray hexes aren't filled in, are also ocean hexes, sea hexes, then you could even have something where you're going, this actually is pretty easy. If these last 6 hexes are all water, you could have a D6 roll to find out which one of these hexes it's in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, where it is. So that would be a sub hex crawl, or you could extend it to make it more of a hex crawl. Bob Mostel, hey Bob, says the Great Bear could probably be on an encounter table instead of a fixed encounter. I would say, well, it's kind of both, because on the one hand, you could just find it, but on the other hand, it could be a random encounter or a wandering encounter where you just happen to find it, but there is an element that was established in the fiction that people go to seek out the Great Bear. So if they're seeking it out, there's some sense where you're trying to find it, and it's not necessarily fixed in a location, but that encounter is kind of out there to be had if you can find it. And of course, we're just talking, we're not getting into details. We have no idea what that would entail, but that's kind of the fixed encounter. But totally, if I was writing up a random wandering monster encounter table for that hex, the Great Bear would be on it. Right. Okay. That was Chicago Wiz's just three hexes. Next one on our hit parade is from the Welsh Piper. And let me just say, by the way, that this, as with many things, I was reading stuff on the OSR subreddit, and someone had asked something about, I think, the size of hexes or something about starting a hex crawl, and folks chimed in with a bunch of links. And so I was able to kind of grab some of these. Didn't have to do a lot of legwork. These were kind of thrown out there for me. So I appreciate, as usual, Redditors for helping make my life easier. And in their honor, I'll have a swig of watered down apple cider for the working man. This one is even older. Goodness, older by almost 10 years. This is from October 21st, 2009 by Aaron D. Smale. I will bump up the size of the print. And I'm going to move. Let me move over. There we go. This is part 1 of their series on hex-based campaign design. In my quest for rapid campaign development, I came across an elegant idea called six-sided gaming hex magic on Grey Wolf's Microlight D20 site. If we have time, maybe I'll copy this into another tab. If we have time, maybe we'll check it out. Subtitled The Lazy Gamer's Guide to World Building, Six-Sided Gaming suggests launching your campaign with an adventure in a single hex, then placing adventures in each of the 6 surrounding hexes, assigning terrain and encounters to match the adventures you've chosen. As the campaign grows, you simply populate the next ring of surrounding hexes, and so on and so on. Defining the campaign by its adventures, instead of the other way around, is a great time saver and perfect for the busy GM. With Grey Wolf's kind permission, I've expanded the concept into a slightly different approach, but with the same time-saving goal. In part 1, we'll start with a hex map and its terrain. All right. And let's see. It's already at 41 minutes, so probably won't get to part 2, depending on how long this turns out to be. And it seems like it's quite long, but we'll see. Might have to do a part 2 of this. So this one is, if Chicago Wiz's was 3 hexes, this essentially is 6 hexes. So you would, I'm guessing you would have an area, one of these hexes, and then you would surround it. And then you would then surround it again and keep doing out in the ring, which I think I actually talked about. And I hadn't even read this, but that's kind of, I think I made a video about radial prep, which I basically talk about a similar, I don't put so fine a point on it as kind of how many hexes to prep, but that's kind of the upshot of what I was talking about in that video. The hex map. The underlying goal of hex-based campaign design is to create a playable setting with as little effort as possible. So I recommend starting with a small map. The sub-hex map from our hex templates post, shown to the right, is a good start at a scale of 5 miles per sub-hex. This makes the template's larger atlas scale hexes 25 miles wide. As you work on the sub-hex template, keep the large hex boundaries in mind, as it'll make life easier when you expand the map and scale up to the atlas level. And then we have a note. The subhex template is now available in hexographer format on the hex templates page. Cool. So I wonder if they've updated that for worldographer or not. But we've got that. Or maybe they're cross compatible. I'm not sure. Choose the climate. The first task is to determine climate. This affects the precise terrain you place in the next step. For example, if you're placing forest, climate indicates what type of growth exists, e.g. conifers and cold climes, deciduous and temperate, or jungle in tropical areas. While not exact, the guidelines below are sufficient for our purposes. And then we're just getting, just your essential climates: Arctic, subarctic, temperate, subtropical, and tropical, and get some descriptions. I'm going to skip over those because I think we kind of know what those are. And if you don't, you can hop over here and read it at your leisure. Next, we're going to assign hex terrain. Terrain placement does not rely on a random function since it's too easy to end up with unrealistic results, e.g. swamps next to deserts or mountains next to plains. Besides, who wants to roll dice for each hex anyway? Instead, I assign a primary type to each atlas hex, then fill in the remaining subhexes with related terrain types. This lets you place terrain sensibly, but with the benefit of some speed. All right, so I think the first thing we need to get into is this is already a lot more involved than Chicago Wiz's method. Chicago Wiz was really just going kind of off the seat of their pants, so to speak. You have an idea for your campaign, some idea. You are setting up basically the climate. The first one took place in an Arctic climate. The second one took place in probably a cool temperate zone, maybe because you saw there was a mixed forest and then a temperate forest. So maybe northern European, Englandish, northeastern or northern US kind of climate. And then, but basically that was all just kind of your just setting. And then he was just putting out hexes, I think, just based on kind of how he felt, the adventures he was trying to run. Oh, there's this adventure that takes place in some woods. I'm going to put some woods out here. This one, what Hex Piper is doing, it sounds similar because they are talking about kind of making rings of hexes and putting your adventures there, but he's getting into a lot more detail about your, the climates and the terrain types that may speak to you or it may not speak to you. I kind of think for speed, going the other way is going to be faster if you're trying to get up and running. Some folks say, "Hey, we want to run a game. We want you to start a new campaign tomorrow. Can you do something?" Okay, I would go with Chicago Wiz's method. That's just easier, quicker to get where you want to go in terms of the game. This one, over the long term, probably as useful, maybe even more useful when you start to fill out surrounding hexes, but you're going to need more lead time if you're doing this method. So he's laying out the basic terrain types. We have water, swamp, desert, plains, forest, hills, and mountains. Assign a terrain type of your choosing to the subhex at the center of the atlas hex. This defines the atlas hex's primary terrain type. The rest of the subhexes are broken down as follows: 18 whole hexes and then 12 half hexes. On the whole hexes, you assign 9 primary terrain, 6 secondary terrain, and 3 tertiary or wildcard terrain. Distribute these where you see fit. So and here we have some terrain types. So if we've got mountains, then if we say we're in the mountains, then the center hex is mountains. And then we would take 9 or 8 other hexes, I guess, and make those mountains. I don't know if we've said what secondary and tertiary are, but I suppose even without, I'm not sure if they're going to define it or not, but we might say, okay, mountains are your primary terrain. Secondary terrain, I would say hills and forest. Tertiary terrain, water in terms of lakes, and maybe swamps. I'm not sure. I don't know. Or plains, maybe. I'm not sure. And then tertiary, probably plains, maybe be tertiary. Desert might be Now, desert might be secondary and something else might be tertiary. I don't know. You'd have to decide it. We'll see. It looks like maybe we're going to get a table that will help of this. And then for the half hexes, you're going to assign any non-wildcard terrain as desired. Okay, and here we have their setup of primary and secondary. So if it's a water hex, primary is water. Everything else are wild cards. No possibility of mountains. Swamp. Water is a wild card. Swamp is primary. Forest and plains are wild cards. Desert. Interesting that swamp, water, swamp, and desert don't have any secondary features. But hey, you can take this table and do with it what you will. I haven't thought through it enough, and I know I don't want to spend the time thinking about now to know if I agree or I disagree. It doesn't really matter. You could grab this table and make one appropriate to you. And then we've got a bunch of notes, which I'm going to skip. Just know that you have these tables to come through. When all the subhexes are filled, you may move on to an adjacent atlas hex whose primary terrain type is any valid terrain on the table above, i.e. primary, secondary, tertiary, or wildcard. If you need some polyhedral guidance, we can roll some dice. And now we get an example. Let's assume a temperate climate. I'll assign plains to the center hex, which becomes the atlas hex's primary terrain. According to the plains column of the terrain table, the remaining subhexes are assigned as plains 9, forest 6, hills 3, plains, forest, or hills get the 12 half hexes. And we could see, just let me below, and then we could see, here we have that. So we have, is that the middle hex? What is that one? Is this grasslands plain? That's just, I'm not sure, but maybe, I guess they're doing, he's got using two different symbols here. Hold on, let me go back. I'm not sure I follow. Did I miss something? Plains 9 hexes, forest 6 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we weren't counting the. Don't count the subhexes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, plains 9 hexes, not including subhexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what's that center one? I think they're just using a separate. So I guess the 9 hexes doesn't include the middle one. You can see this is a bit more fiddly. Not that you wouldn't get the hang of it after a few minutes, but it's fiddly. And then we can roll for the adjacent primary terrain, the adjacent atlas hexes, and so there you get this, where you get a concept, which this part I will say I kind of like, because here you have your detailed. You're in here. Maybe this is why they're using the generic grasslands hex, and then they use a more detailed one. I'm not sure. But here you have basically, okay, we're in this grasslands hex. Here's all the way around. And then kind of in the distance, what might you see? Grasslands, hills, forest. And we don't really need to know this stuff in here yet, really only until they get close. But if this were a hill, or if they were over here and they could look across, they could just get a sense of, oh, here's more hills. Oh, there's more grasslands, whatever. So I kind of like that. Hey, Michael Shorten. I shall wave back. Welcome. So I do like that, but this is a bit more work, right? But it does have a benefit of giving you, if remember with Chicago Wiz, I thought, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about the surrounding hexes just to get some more context and maybe have answers to questions and things that come up. This, you do get a bit more of that. You've got a lot more laid out that you can go through here. So one thing that'll be interesting, and maybe this is kind of the ultimate, is there's probably some way to combine the two approaches to get something that gives you good geography, or good in quotes kind of geography, but it's longer versus Chicago Wiz's method, in which you're kind of just sort of throwing out geography that makes sense for your particular things you want to do. Then maybe you're figuring out, well, how can I merge these things together? Oh, that's you. You know what? I am terrible. I didn't even recognize. Well, hey, welcome, Chicago Wiz. I'll have to get in touch with me on Twitter or elsewhere. Maybe we could do an interview so we can go over some of your stuff in more depth, or if you've come up with any more things in the intervening 5 years, geez, since that other one. Yeah, hit me up on. I know we follow each other on Twitter, so hit me up, or I'll hit you up after this is over. We'll try to figure something out because that'll be an awesome thing to do, which I didn't even think about. So thanks for coming. Yeah. So I look at that. I've one of the creators has given me the thumbs up onto combining them. I think I would probably combine them. I think I like the specificity this gives, but it is fiddlier. It will take more time. If you love your tables and things, and goodness knows I love tables and things, then you can really kind of get into that. But I also like the speed of deploying the 3 hex method. Maybe fit them together somehow. I'll have to try to mess around. Maybe I can come up with a way to put them together into some kind of hybrid. Next, we have scaling up. Where am I on time? Okay. The Atlas hex on your map is 25 miles wide, which matches the hex scale on the Atlas template. When mapping on the Atlas level, populate each hex with the primary terrain of each Atlas hex on your submap. However, the Atlas map is very big, so I recommend that you transfer your subhex map to the regional template. Okay, this is kind of getting into the templates. All right, and then basically we have our next steps. So just keeping it to this stuff, this right here. So this gives you, let's see, if I was going to try to say compare and contrast things, right? So with Chicago Wizards 1, you are essentially the adventures are kind of the pull. You're coming up with these points of interest, and then you're sort of seeding them kind of where they make sense and tying them together. With the Welsh Piper method, you are hammering down, again in quotes, fantasy realistic terrain and sort of putting that in a method. So putting that in and doing it in a circular way. So you're not doing your whole map at once, but you're gonna be taking whatever that primary zone they're in, right, and then generating out in rings. I think there's natural advantages. I think it is nice to have some of this stuff, like I mentioned. Hey, I just want to know what's in these outlying hexes. I already have an idea what's there, even though they're not filled in. Which I think for me personally, just knowing that this is kind of woods out here, or this is kind of grass, even though I don't know everything inside of it, just means that if, like I said, the players are at a high point, they ask a traveler, "Hey, what's over there?" "Oh, it's the plains of Tharblah." Okay, great. And then I can just write that and go. But if I didn't have that, then I might be stumbling around more than I want to. So having that just helps get my brain in gear. But this is taking a little bit more time. But though I suppose again, if you're using something like Worldographer, you can kind of take the same thing and find a spot and kind of generate, and maybe use this to clean it up. Because I think you could take something in Worldographer that's going to already have all these hexes and then make your own kind of table and then clean up. Okay, this should be this should be that should be that. Krister says the collaboration would be awesome. And then Terrence says, the beautiful plains of Thar, blah. Yeah, exactly. The plains of Thar, blah. I wanted to get to the Gygax 75 challenge as a third method that was also referenced. I don't know if I'm going to make it. Let me just take a quick look at the PDF. How long? This PDF's pretty long. I'm just going to look to see if there's anything around. Well, you know what? It might not be that bad. All right, I'm going to close my window so I can swap windows. Not that. I'm going to exit that share, which you can't see. I'm going to share another screen. Change this to Gygax 75. It's going to be there in just a second. Enable the 2-page view. Full screen. Swing back over here. Oh, you know what? I forgot that. It doesn't like it if I share it and then monkey with the screen sizes. Let's try this again. Riveting streaming. Here we go. Okay. Ray Otis. Have I had Ray on a stream? I don't know if I have or not, but I know we're on a couple of Discord servers together. Put this together. I found this a while back and I thought it was fascinating. I hadn't had a chance to look at it. At some point, I probably want to go back and look at it in detail, but I'm going to jump to somewhere. Let's start at the concept. See, because I really just want to get to the stuff about mucking up so it seems to be that you go through this. The concept on the Gygax 75 is basically going through kind of a challenge of creating your setting, I think, over a number of weeks. So you go through, and here you have week 1, then you go to week 2, and then week 3. So we're just going to talk about it. Like I said, I want to go through this in more detail. We'll go over the whole thing. Maybe we'll do that as a challenge for everyone. Go through and do that. But let's take a look at what their guidance is for setting up your hex map at this time. Brian Smith says a roll table of visible landmarks would work in generating a vista for when they climb up and look out in the next hex. Like, hey, you see a forest and a white spire. Yeah, I think you could do that too, right? If you wanted to do that as kind of a step, I don't know, 4A in that Welsh Piper method of coming up with the sort of atlas level terrain and then maybe one atlas level point of interest, then yeah, you could certainly pepper it with stuff like that. Just know that the more enticing you make it, the more likely your players are going to go there, which may be a little bit against what you're trying to do, since if we want to keep them in the 3 or so points that we have using that Chicago Wiz's 3 hexes, we may not want them to start saying, "Oh, there's a spire over there." It's like, no. We wanted you to go over here. So just be careful, because you might open doors that your party will want to go through. So this is part of week 2, which is mapping the land around the dungeon and town. Gygax suggests sitting down with a large piece of hex ruled paper and drawing a large-scale map. A map with a scale of 1 hex equals 1 mile will be about right for player operations such as exploring, camping, adventuring, and eventually building their strongholds. Even such small things as a witch's hut and side entrances to the dungeon can be shown on the map. The central features of the map must be the major town and the dungeon entrance. So here are the tasks. Get a sheet of hex paper, 1 settlement of significant size, 2 other settlements, camps, larger or smaller towns, a keep, the usual home of a fantasy race, etc., 1 major terrain feature, 1 mysterious site, and 1 main dungeon entrance. So this is what they're recommending, or Ray Otis is recommending. So 1 settlement, a couple of, say, 1 primary settlement, a couple of minor settlements, and the minor settlements, camps, other towns, a keep, where the dwarves, elves, whomever lives, some kind of major terrain feature, a mysterious site, and a dungeon site. And I'm guessing that in this case, the dungeon and the mysterious site are not the same. So there might be, looking back at Chicago Wiz's examples, one of them would be the Barrows, and one would be the Barrows would be the mysterious site, and the tomb of the wizard assassin would be the dungeon site. Regarding scale, I'm not that caught up on the scale. Whether you want to use 1 mile hex, 5 mile, 6 mile hexes, whatever. I think it's all about what's going to work for you. And then create a random encounter table. So then the example they have is this Temuria hex map. After drawing this sketch of Temuria, a region of Uzrak, I realized it had a weird scale. I started with the cities and a 1 mile per hex scale in my head. As I drew the wilderness, I unintentionally shifted scale and was thinking of 3 or even 6 mile hexes. The result is a map that has a kind of primitive cartographic scale where more important things are larger. This is how mistakes become cool features. Hey, Michael, you're welcome. Thanks for writing that all that time long ago. He said it's cool to see 3 hexes still lives. Trust me, it gets brought up in Reddit and other places all the time. So it is alive and well. It has, as the 1-page dungeon template that you mentioned in there, it has a life of its own. And then he's got the random encounter table. And that's it. Okay. So not as much practical advice from Ray Otis, but I think it gives you some things maybe you'd want to. What I like about this is it gives you a checklist. Okay, here's what you want to have. 1 major settlement, maybe some minor settlements, a major terrain feature, mysterious site, and a dungeon. And it's kind of interesting when you take these things and you can apply it to what we already looked at. I think the Chicago Wiz examples kind of have these things. Maybe not the 2 other settlements, unless you look at the Ruined Inn as a settlement, and then the Lost City as a settlement. But you can see how this kind of fits. If you look at the terrain feature covering 3 hexes, if you look at the ice version, you've got the either the sea, depending on how the sea extends, or you have that ice flow area. That's a major terrain feature. The woods, we don't know if it covers 3 hexes. We got 2, but we just add 1 more, and we have that as 3 hexes. We got mysterious sites, and we have dungeon entrances. In the one example, the mysterious site would be the monastery, and then we have the caves And in the other one, like I said, we've got the barrows, and then we have the wizard assassin's tomb. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if Ray looked at the three hexes or is just kind of great minds think alike, but that kind of syncs up really well. And I think where I would say, looking at these all together, it's good that we're over an hour now, so good to wrap this up. Looking at these three things, I think it's kind of interesting because they give you, each one of these gives you something a little bit different. I think Chicago gives you a great sort of free form way, but with the discipline. We're only going to do three things, and we're going to use three sentences to describe them. And we're going to be really just, but thoughtful, but in a very concise way. We're just going to set it up. We're not going to get carried away. Boom. That stuff's out there. Welsh Piper is, here's how you can get your hex and get it so that it makes some kind of sense in the way that we think of Earth-like geography, which can be a challenge. We're going to avoid getting into weird stuff that might nip us in the bud later when we kind of create something and suddenly we look at it and we go, oh my gosh, this doesn't make sense. Right? We're going to avoid that because we can use the Welsh Piper to give us that great structure, the girding of what we can do to make sure that our hexes match up with some kind of shared fantasy Earth-like reality. And of course, if you want to take it, you could probably take their tables. If you have a setting that has specific things you want to add or create about it to make it your own, then you could take their tables, adjust them, and then you have this template that you could use for your world. Whenever you're creating hexes, you're following that template, and boom, you'll get to all the places you need to, and the context will remain the same, which is great. And then the Rayotis adds, hey, here's a checklist of things you should have, and kind of some relationships between them. So all in all, what is the best starting Hexmap setup? I would say, as a kind of a cop out, it's a combination of all these things. And maybe we can get together, everybody, and put this and combine it into the Uber starting Hexmap list. But I definitely like using something like the Hex, or like the Welsh Piper's method for doing the geography. I like Chicago Wiz's method for getting a few points of interest in a town and just being disciplined and sticking with that, and kind of really just thinking about interesting things. And then you use whatever brain power you have left over from doing that to think about all the different connections you can make between the places. And then use something like the Guy X75 that gives you a couple of things. It gives you a checklist to kind of keep you on course. And I like the idea, and we'll go in this in more detail in some other video, putting it kind of on a timeline. Don't spend oodles of time on this. This is, 1 week, whatever amount of game prep time you have in week 2, that's this one. And you're going to move on to other stuff later on. So just get it down. That's also where the conciseness that Chicago mentions comes into play. So there it is. My answer, combination of these three methods will, I think, do you really well and get you on solid footing. That's all I got for now. Michael, aka Chicago Wiz, I will reach out to you separately. Maybe we can, like I said, set up an interview because that would be kick-ass. Thanks for finding the stream, and appreciate you hanging out for a little bit. Everyone else, or everyone, I suppose, Michael, you too, if you want to give a thumbs up on your way out, that would be awesome. If you're not subscribed and you feel like subscribing, this is kind of what I do. If you just want to see more of this stuff, then subscribe. That would be awesome as well. Other than that, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. Game on, everybody, and I'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.